It's the 9th day of 30 Days Wild, and I just received a package that I've been waiting excitedly for. In here, I've got a trellis and a planter that are going to go up in my garden and provide lots of vertical space and vertical plants that will let all sorts of new animals come in. My foster dog was excited as I was about getting this box open. This planter was delivered flat packed, so first thing to do is put it together. While I put it together, I want to talk a little bit about why creating a space to have a planter with a trellis on is so important. It's really about utilising all of the space that you have in your garden, and that includes the three-dimensional space. There's a whole host of climbing plants that are really great for wildlife, and by putting a planter with a trellis up, you can provide space for those plants to climb without digging into your walls or into fences that you don't want them to climb on. So you've got a space set aside for 3D vertical space where these different animals can be attracted to these plants. A lot of the climbing plants look really nice as well, so they can be a great addition to the garden. Think of the passionflower, which has sort of a white unfolding petals that give way to this really bright purple and yellow kind of flower. Or you've got the honeysuckle that has a really unique shape. And you've got things like clematis, which can form really big flowers. And then wisteria, which sort of drapes down with a series of flowers that look like they're raining down over everything. Climbing plants broadly fall into 3 types. And depending on what type of trellis you're using, can depend on which of those plants you want. So the first type is the ones that kind of ramble over a structure. They can be trained to climb up things, but they won't do it naturally. So think of something like roses, where you need to tie it down to get it into the shape. You've also got the types of plants that will entwine themselves around a structure. So think things like honeysuckle, that will naturally start twisting around things. And then finally, you've got the plants that will cling on by themselves without the need for any sort of entwining structures or to be trained. So that's something like ivy, which will just be able to climb up walls without help. Putting this planter together is a lot harder than I initially thought it would be, because these steel bars are quite difficult to bend into the exact shape to get them all into the square position that they need to be in. So remembering how important this is going to be for garden wildlife is really what's keeping me motivated through this project as I screw in each bolt. A trellis isn't just good for the pollinators that will come and visit the flowers. It's also great at providing different vegetation for things like solitary bees that need to build their nests out of different types of substances, like leaves or dirt or different bits of litter. And it's also good for birds picking out bits of their nest as well. But one of the coolest features of a trellis that's in a wildlife garden is the little gap that's left behind it. When the trellis is fully covered in vegetation, if you leave a gap behind it rather than mount it directly to a wall, you provide a great shelter for all sorts of species. So not just things like snails and caterpillars, but the actual butterflies themselves can rest behind there, as well as birds have been known to build their nests behind trellises, and bats as well can use it as a temporary roost. So it's a really great feature to have in the garden, and particularly on a planter, because you can position the planter slightly away from the wall and have this feature for all sorts of animals. With my trellis planter built and in position, it's time to fill it with compost. And of course my choice is always to use peat-free compost so that I'm not destroying the natural peatland habitat. Usually when I'm planting for my wildlife garden, I try and include native species so that they've been adapted and evolved alongside the species that are going to be making use of them. However, I do have a section of my garden that's more about the looks and about getting pretty flowers in that you would typically find in a garden centre. For this structure, I'm sort of doing a mix of the two. So the first flower that I'm planting is the passionflower. It's not native here, it's native to South America, but it actually does attract a lot of our bee species, so it can be a good one to include. The second plant species that I'm starting off in here was also chosen for a mix between its appearance and its value for wildlife. So this is the clematis, specifically a purple variant, and it's got really big, beautiful flowers, but it can also attract various different pollinators, and like the passionflower, once it's grown a lot, it will provide a shelter for them as well. Both of these species have evolved a really fascinating mechanism for being able to climb, which is these tendril-like structures that automatically wrap around whatever they encounter. So fixing it to the trellis is really as simple as making sure that you get those tendrils to wrap around each section, and then it can just stand freely straight from where it's been planted into. I'm only starting off with these two species just to see how they grow and how I might need to manage them. But over time I do intend to add a few more species that are beneficial to wildlife, possibly down in the bottom of this planter, and maybe another climber as well. So that ended up taking about an hour and a half to both build the planter and trellis and to actually plant out the plants. I'm really happy with how it looks. I've wanted one there for ages and finally got round to doing it. It's going to bloom really beautifully with that clematis and the passionflower, and probably I'll add another one in once those have settled in. And then it's also going to attract a lot of really nice pollinators as well. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for some of the butterfly species that I've seen locally. Let me know if you've got one of these and what you planted in it to help the 3D vertical space in your garden. And make sure to subscribe to keep up with 30 Days Wild.